was 20 years old, I often spent days alone at my parents' house where I grew up. The feeling of being alone always makes me a little worried because my house is located peacefully next to a small pond in the garden, creating a quiet scene, but also bringing me comfort when being in a familiar space. Belong. Every time, I often enjoy private time by watching movies or reading books. On the contrary, on the other side of the pond is a small park where children often play during the day, but when night falls, the space becomes mysteriously quiet, as if all sounds have stopped. There are when I felt the space around me became too quiet, and the silence seemed to become a source of anxiety. Occasionally, I could hear the wind blowing through the cracks in the door, or the sound of tree branches hitting each other outside, making me think of strange things that could happen in the dark. Time alone sometimes makes me feel nervous, but it's also an opportunity for me to think about my life, my dreams, and what I really want in the future. On a calm summer night, when there were no classes to attend to, I returned home and chose a comfortable seat for myself in my favorite living room, where the warm air mixed with the gentle breeze from the open windows. While I was passionately watching my favorite TV show, suddenly, a strange sound interrupted my thoughts. That sound made me imagine geese or ducks arguing on the edge of the pond because they often create noisy arguments. So I told myself there was nothing to worry about and continued to immerse myself in the world of the screen and ignore those sounds. But as the sound of splashing water continued and seemed to show no signs of stopping, a wave of fear began to arise in my heart. I turned off the TV, turned the volume down to the minimum, and listened to every sound. Putting my ear close to the window, I realized that the sound was not that of a duck or a goose, but another noise, strange and haunting, as if someone was struggling in the water. My heart began to beat harder, and an uneasy feeling rose inside. I opened the living room door and stepped out onto the porch, the moonlight dimly illuminating the garden scene. In the quiet space, a man's humming sounded from the pond, sending chills down my spine. There was clearly someone swimming in the pond, and it felt like an undeniable intrusion, as if a dark secret was lurking just outside my door. Fear grabbed me, leaving me standing still in the middle of the night, not knowing whether to act or stand still and wait. When I turned on the porch light, its light revealed part of the pond. Suddenly, the splashing and humming sound stopped, leaving me feeling cold. That person must have seen me. I wondered if it was my neighbor Paul, but I was sure no one in my neighborhood would go swimming at this hour. I panicked and went back in, locked the door, and quickly texted my parents. Every second passes like a century. The phone remains silent. No response. Anxiety swirls, making the surrounding space more stuffy than ever. A cold wind blew. I looked out the window and saw a dark shadow beside the pond, standing still like a statue. My heart was beating wildly, fear rising. I need to know who that person is, but right now, I'm really scared and just want to run away from here. I took a deep breath to calm down, then turned the TV back on, but the images on the screen were just a blur in my head. The darkness outside seemed to swallow everything, making it impossible for me to think. I accidentally forgot that the light from the screen can attract attention. Suddenly, a noise rang out on the porch, making me feel more panicked than ever. My heart pounded as I searched for the remote to turn off the TV, and everything immediately became eerily still. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust to the darkness, but then a coldness ran down my spine when I noticed the sound of someone gasping just outside the window. There were eyes that seemed to be piercing through the night, looking at me, making me feel like I was being monitored from the darkness. I quietly lay flat on the sofa, trying to avoid the eyes of the stranger out there. The moments of silence lasted for what seemed like an eternity, until a low voice said from outside the window, "I see you." It felt like my heart stopped beating. In a moment of confusion, I didn't know how to react. I called out my neighbor's name, and I hoped that this was just a cruel joke, but all I got in response was eerie silence. The sound of footsteps gently receded, as if the person was retreating into the darkness, leaving me with an uncomfortable fear, as if there was something lurking out there. When everything calmed down, I lay still on the chair, afraid to move. After a while, I suddenly thought of checking the door lock. Determined not to let fear control me, I jumped up and rushed to the front door. Luckily, it was locked tight. The side door is also safe, but the worry still lingers. After texting my family, my dad finally replied, advising me to turn on the yard light to check if anyone was there. I looked out the window to check on the porch and actually saw no one there. In a panic, I took a large knife out to the porch, and what I saw made me more afraid. Half-dried footprints on the ground. These footprints could not belong to anyone other than a barefoot person. I followed the footsteps around the porch, and when I came around the corner, I couldn't believe my eyes. Someone's forehead and eyes were protruding from the edge of the porch, staring at me as if he had heard me. "Come and are waiting for me." When our eyes met, the person turned away, and in a moment of panic, I decided to call 911 and notify my parents. I locked the door, waiting for them to come. When my parents arrived, I felt relieved and more secure. The police came, and they started asking about any enemies our family might have, or if there were any problems with the neighbors. After doing a quick check around the area, the police found no one, and I decided to close all the doors of the house and turn on all the lights to make the atmosphere safer. The next day, when the warm sunlight filtered through the curtains, I woke up in a space full of light, but the feeling of peace could not hide the storm in my mind. Last night, the stranger's figure was still present, like an unresolved nightmare. His face kept repeating in my head, like a never-ending horror movie. Was he following me? This question is like a snake coiling around my mind, suffocating my breath. Every noise outside, birds singing, traffic became suspicious, like spies silently watching me from afar. When I looked out the window, the familiar scene seemed to have turned into a mysterious maze where anything could become a threat. Even though that man never came back, I decided not to sit still. I started recording everything unusual, from bizarre dreams to normal conversations. every page became part of a larger story where I was the protagonist, not just a victim. Not only do I need to be careful with others, but I also need to explore myself in a familiar space where every shadow can contain a secret. I have a dog and go for a walk, which I do every day. Our route is always the same, starting from the exit of the yard and leading straight into the parking lot at the end of the dead-end street of the common area, where my family and I live. Walking at night has become a habit of mine, partly because I like the quiet and peaceful atmosphere of the evening, but also because the dog is always eager to go out. This habit never caused any problems until one night, when everything suddenly changed. That evening, as usual, I started my last walk of the day. The cold atmosphere made me feel creepy, but I still brought a flashlight to illuminate the dark parking lot I would pass through. I also decided to only use one earbud to listen to music, to keep myself alert to any strange sounds that might appear. As I approached the parking lot, I suddenly heard a strange voice coming from ahead. At first, I didn't pay attention to it because the music in the headphones drew me into a separate world. Here's a more dramatic version, retaining the content you provided. After a while, I realized something was wrong, and when an uneasy feeling began to rise in my heart, I stopped, took off my headphones, and listened. The voice rang out again, this time clearer, as if someone was standing right next to me, but I still didn't see anyone around. A feeling of anxiety welled up in my heart, but I still decided to continue moving forward, hoping that it was just my imagination. But after a few steps, a cold breeze brushed the back of my neck, giving me goosebumps, and I stopped again, right next to the parked cars. With the flashlight in hand, I illuminated the surroundings. The flickering light swept across the dim shadows, but still saw no sign of anyone. The sound still echoed in my ears. "Help me," like a cry for help lurking in the darkness. My heart pounded, and a haunting question appeared in my mind. Is there anything waiting for me? The voice continued to ring 3 more times in a row, and each time, it made me feel more scared. I cannot understand what is going on. When I saw the dog's ears stand up and his eyes turn toward the sound, I realized that I wasn't the only one who heard this strange sound. The sound that came out wasn't exactly like a child's voice. It has a strange sound, both like an adult and like a child, creating a strangely creepy feeling that I don't know how to describe for you to understand. Each time the sound faded, but the tone and nuance remained the same, making me feel scared. The dog and I ran straight home in panic, my heart aroused with extreme anxiety. I told my mother about what I had just encountered, and she felt confused and did not believe what I told her. I offered to call the police, just to make sure no one was in danger there, but my mother thought that was unnecessary. The story I'm about to tell will help you understand why my family moved out of the house we were living in, even though my family had lived there since my grandparents' time. I have struggled with depression for a long time, and sometimes I feel completely useless. Although the situation is better now, my childhood years were really scary, something I don't want to remember. My house is located in the middle of a dense forest, surrounded by trees, and there is a forest separating it from the neighbors, and I often spend time alone in my room. My bedroom is relatively large, located in a hidden corner of the house, with 2 walls overlooking the trees. For a kid my age, That was really scary, especially since I was a shy kid and afraid of the dark. When I was about 13 years old, strange phenomena began to appear. I'm at an age where sleeping with my parents after a nightmare is not allowed, and people often say it's because I have a rich imagination. So I often use a nightlight with different light modes, and I usually keep the light red, the color I like to help me sleep easily. However, one night I woke up in the middle of the night and realized that the nightlight was no longer the red color I usually had on. At first, I didn't pay much attention to it and went back to sleep, but after a week, I saw that the nightlight was not red, and this made me curious. When I asked my parents about this, they just looked at each other, looked confused, and said they didn't know what I was saying. A feeling of insecurity began to creep into my heart. A short time later, I woke up and saw that the nightlight had been completely disconnected and lying quietly on the floor. The uneasiness in my heart grew even greater. When I told my parents about my anxiety, they advised me to focus on my studies. My dad even said that I was old enough to not need a nightlight anymore. Then a few days later, the nightlight suddenly disappeared, as if it had vanished into thin air. I understand that my parents are hiding something from me. Or maybe they thought it was time for me to get rid of that nightlight. A big argument broke out between us about that nightlight. After a week passed, everything seemed to return to normal. But then I woke up in the middle of the night, 3 days in a row for no reason. When I informed my parents about this, they reassured me and told me it was just one of the normal signs of growing up. However, the same thing happened several times, and instead of going back to sleep, I decided to stay awake. A few minutes after I woke up as usual and didn't go back to sleep, I heard a rustling sound coming from the closet. My parents didn't believe it, and my dad checked the closet, only seeing old toys and clothes. Nothing unusual here. The following nights became the most haunting nights of my life. And even now, when I remember, I still feel scared. At night, I am always woken up by that strange noise, feeling like I am living in evil. Dreaming never ends. Finally, after being woken up so many times, I begged my parents to believe me. But my dad just got angry, and as if I was imagining things, he dragged me to the closet to prove that there was nothing there, and he went to clean the closet to prove to me that there was nothing there. There's nothing unusual in there. While he was cleaning, he suddenly pulled a painting off the wall, and everyone was stunned to see a large hole in the wall that the painting had covered. My mother started to panic and scream, while my father quickly took out a flashlight to check. The hole was too deep. It was impossible to see clearly what was inside, so my father ran out to look around the house. He discovered a small hole at the base of the wall, and after digging, he realized that it was not just a shallow hole, but was actually a passage from the forest to my room. The next day, my mother and I left the house, went to stay at my uncle's house, and my family moved out soon after. I hate having to remember this experience, but I know I will have to face it one day. My parents also didn't want to mention this incident, perhaps because they felt guilty for not trusting me. It was scary to think that a stranger had been entering my room every night for such a long time. I don't know what they want and probably won't know forever. If your children come to you about unusual things, listen and believe them. I'm Mike, and I'm on the threshold of my final year of college, but everything around me seems to change so quickly. The once familiar home is now just a place full of tension, and once close friends have become strangers. It feels like everything is slipping out of reach, and the immediate future is just a blur. Standing at the intersection with no answers, I wondered, is there another path? A path that no one sees, that can take me to a peaceful place amidst the chaos? I arrived in Prague on a cold winter day when this ancient city seemed to be engulfed in a thick fog. Fascinated by the quiet and mysterious beauty of this place, I hoped that Prague could help me find a small corner of peace in my soul. One evening, I accidentally walked into an old pub near the old town. Inside, dark wooden tables and flickering lights create a warm atmosphere in contrast to the cold outside. After a few glasses of wine, when I walked out onto the street, I suddenly realized that I had dropped my apartment keys somewhere. Amidst the winding cobblestone streets, a feeling of anxiety surrounded me when I realized it was too late at night to go back to look for things. Prague, with its magnificent beauty, has now become a strange place, as vast as my own life. With such a situation, the first thought that came to me was to find a place to stay overnight because it was too late to find the key or make a new one. And not long after, it suddenly started raining before I could find a place to rest. Finally, I decided to crawl into a nearby bridge. Even though I don't know where I am, at least I can avoid the rain and feel safer. When my eyes closed, I suddenly heard faint sounds coming from the other side of the river. I jumped up and saw men standing nearby, next to a small boat. They didn't seem to notice my presence here. In just a few fleeting minutes, I realized I was witnessing a drug transaction. Even though my Czech language skills are limited, I saw them exchanging suitcases and bags, and what happened made me feel nervous. I thought I should leave, but I didn't want to attract attention, so I decided to wait it out. Suddenly, one of them shouted loudly and pointed a gun at another person. After a moment of silence, the other person raised his hands to surrender, talking continuously as if to save himself. The rest began to strip him of his clothes and take all his possessions. Feeling that my safety was no longer there, I stood up, intending to secretly leave there. As I started to stand up and was about to move, one of them shouted that there was someone on the other end. Immediately, I turned and ran, not daring to look back. They continued to shout, but from what I heard, there was only one sentence: "Don't shoot." I ran until I was exhausted, and I don't know how long I ran. I only knew that when I stopped, I almost vomited and had no strength left. I knew that they wouldn't be able to catch me, but if they had decided to chase and catch me at that time, perhaps things could have been very different. Now, I still sometimes think about that night, a moment where, if they had shot, I might not have had the chance to tell you this story now. Sometimes I wonder if life is destined for me to run away forever. On a normal afternoon at school, I was walking with Linda, my best friend. She was telling some story while I was spinning around due to pressure from both family and school. As we passed by the restroom, I suddenly felt the need to go to the bathroom. I asked Linda if she wanted to go with me, but she shook her head and said she would wait for me outside. Entering the restroom, I immediately realized there was no one else there. I find this strange because this restroom is usually always crowded. However, I didn't pay much attention and went to the bathroom. Just a few seconds after sitting down, I heard the bathroom door open and close suddenly, as if someone had just entered. However, I didn't hear the sound of using the restroom, so I thought maybe they were hiding from the manager, so I didn't pay any further attention. as I stood up to refasten my pants and read the scribbles on the wall. I heard the door open again and assumed the other person had left. As I walked out the door, I saw Linda looking at me with a strange look. I asked her what was wrong, and she asked who was standing right behind me in the bathroom stall. Immediately, I felt creepy. I assured her that no one was there with me and asked her not to joke like that. Linda immediately confirmed that she was completely serious and not joking. She said that as soon as I walked in, she felt like she also wanted to go to the bathroom, and she went in. When she passed the room I was in, she saw a person standing in the room, their shoes touching the bathroom. Into my shoes, that means that person and I are very close to each other. Seeing this, she was very confused and left there, not wanting to get involved in what was happening. I reiterated that I was the only person in the room, but I also heard someone enter without using the bathroom. Linda said that no one went to the bathroom until she entered. I'm not someone who believes in spiritual phenomena, but at this moment, there was a cold feeling running down my spine that made me tremble involuntarily. I found a manager to report the incident, but they just tried to reassure me that nothing happened and that Linda was probably just teasing me. But Linda wasn't one to joke around, and when she looked me straight in the eyes with a serious look, recounting every detail of what she had seen, I felt like something really strange had happened. Memories of that incident still follow me to this day, even though I am now 20 years old. Some time ago, I rented a lovely little house in a small city where I started my first job in life. The one-story house has 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom, just enough for my simple life and occasionally hosting friends. My landlord, Linda, is very friendly and seems like she chose to rent to me because she didn't want to rent to another man. Life in the new house was quite peaceful until one night when I heard a knock on the door. I walked out and asked, "Who is that?" But no one answered. It felt unsafe, and there was something strange behind me, so I decided not to open the door. The next morning, when I was about to leave the house, I suddenly saw a paper stuck on the glass door with the words, "Hello, beautiful." I suddenly remembered the knock on the door last night, and I was sure it was the same person. I felt disgusted and threw the paper in the trash, hoping this was just a joke and wouldn't happen again. But no, that night the knock on the door rang again, earlier than yesterday. This time, I just stood quietly, listening without daring to open it. There was no way to see through the door. Fear rose within me. It feels like this is not a joke, but a real dangerous threat. I called my parents to tell them about this, hoping they could give me some advice. My father is a retired police officer. He advised me to be careful, and if this situation continues, he will come home with me. The next morning, my mind was heavy with anxiety when I checked the window and saw a new piece of paper. "I like to watch over you." Terrified, I took a photo of the note and sent it to my family and Linda, asking if she had ever had any trouble staying at this house. Linda appeared surprised and affirmed that she had never encountered such a situation while at the house and that she had no harassers at all. To prevent this from happening, I decided to leave a note on the door saying that if anyone was looking for Linda, she didn't live here and that I would call the police if they didn't stop knocking. I believe that when I do, that everything will end. That night, I went to bed hoping everything would be peaceful the next day. But the next morning, when I opened the door, I found a new piece of paper. "I'm not looking for Linda." "I'm looking for you" attached. My name. At this point, fear turned into panic within me. Immediately, I called my dad, and he immediately drove over. When he arrived, I felt relieved, but also worried for my safety. We decided to call the police. To let the harasser know about the police presence, we reported the situation. When the police arrived, they recorded the information and promised to investigate. Fortunately, the molester did not return, and that night, my father stayed up very late, even though I had gone to bed. I quickly packed up and moved out of the house. Linda was very sympathetic to me, and in the end, the harasser from the old house did not follow me to the new place. Even though I may never know who that person was to this day, that experience still haunts me forever. I have smoked cigarettes every day for many years, and even though I know the harmful effects, I still cannot give up. Before you rush to judge, hear me out. I've recently been seeing a psychologist in hopes of quitting smoking, but unfortunately, the therapy hasn't had much effect yet. Smoking addiction is not my only problem. My habit of sleeping late is even worse. I often stay up until 3-4 a.m. and rarely get out of bed before noon. Even though I'm trying to adjust everything, neither my smoking nor my habit of sleeping late has improved, and this is related to the strange story I'm about to tell. A few months ago, late one night as usual, I stood on the balcony smoking a cigarette. I live in a quiet residential area, and the houses are quite far apart. However, from my balcony, I can see my neighbor's backyard. I didn't know him well, just noticed that he drove a dark blue Hyundai and seemed to live alone. But that night, there was something different. A black Toyota parked right in front of his house, and I had never seen it before. At first, I didn't think much about this, simply considering it a random change. However, on the following nights, the Toyota still appeared regularly around midnight, and this repetition made me begin to feel more curious than usual. Even though I told myself that I shouldn't pry into other people's affairs, I still couldn't ignore this phenomenon. Every night, I sat on the balcony and stared at the neighbor's yard, trying to guess what that car was hiding. Curiosity gradually turned into obsession, until one night I witnessed a scene that changed all my thoughts. It was around 5 a.m. when the sky was still quite dark. I was standing there, smoking as usual, when I suddenly saw my neighbor walking out of the house, the first time I saw him appear at this hour. But what caught my attention was that he was carrying a long black bag that looked quite heavy. The bag resembles a golf bag, but is obviously much heavier. He opened the door of the Toyota, gently put his bag inside, and quickly left. That image made me feel like something wasn't right, but at that time, I just thought I'd think about it more the next day. The next day, I decided to sit on the balcony earlier. I opened my laptop and worked while waiting. At about 1 a.m., the other one appeared again. This time, after parking the car, the neighbor slowly walked out and opened the car door, pulling out the same long bag as the night before. But it seemed that this time, the bag was heavier than last time because I saw him having a harder time. When bringing it into the house, I sensed something unusual and decided not to stop at just observing. The next night, I decided to drive after my neighbor. At around 3 a.m., when I saw my neighbor's car start to move, I quickly got out and quietly followed from afar, trying not to be obvious. The car left the neighborhood, and entered a narrow dirt road leading deep into the forest. I continued to watch, feeling like I was caught up in a detective movie. This road led to an old, abandoned gas station in the middle of the forest, and in front of that gas station, a familiar dark blue Hyundai was parked. At this moment, a feeling of anxiety began to rise in my heart. I stopped the car some distance away and waited. After about an hour, the Hyundai quietly left the gas station and disappeared. I started moving closer to the gas station, determined to find out what was inside. But when I got closer, I discovered that the doors were all locked and the windows couldn't be opened. Not knowing what to do next, I picked up a rock and broke a glass window. Immediately, an alarm sounded, making me panic. Why does an abandoned gas station have an alarm system? I quickly ran back to my car and drove away. On the way home, I called the police to report the incident, but did not reveal many details. The next morning, I woke up hoping it was all over, but when I stepped out onto the balcony, I saw the police surrounding my neighbor's house. They took him out in handcuffs. I watched in confusion and worry. From then until now, I still don't know what really happened, and although I have returned to the path leading into the forest many times, it is always blocked by a closed fence. What I experienced was not just a temporary curiosity, but also a haunting event, making me forever wonder if I would ever dare to go back to find out the truth.